Welcome to Effective Change, a podcast sharing the journeys of people who have created social impacts. At Effective Change, we question the meaning of effective social impact and find out how leaders have found their ways to run a socially impactful organization. Hello, I'm Parla, and I'm really excited to be hosting today's episode with Consuela, and we hope you're all well. Today, we're delighted to be joined by the lovely Lina Chan, who is the founder and CEO of Parla, based in London. And welcome, Lina.
Hi, very nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Just so that our audience understands what it is that Parla does and what it is truly about, could you please just give us a brief summary just so that they understand what it is so that they can help support?
Yeah. So we're a digital health platform. Any women who have experienced pregnancy loss, struggle with symptoms of PCOS, endometriosis, or is struggling with infertility, they can come to us and we will connect them with the right experts and products that will help them. And hopefully they can then feel supported along their journey, and we can take out all that noise and confusion for them.
I guess we can just start by the journey at Parla, and how did Parla come about? What was the inspiration behind the organization?
Yeah, so Parla was born from my very personal experience. I think a lot of startups tend to have that as the founder story. The founder typically has that pain point and then gets enough energy to want to make that change. So for me, I was in my mid-30s and I started trying to conceive, and I struggled with pregnancy loss. So I had a few pregnancy losses, and then I also then had more problems trying to conceive. So it was just a very, very confusing time. And I think for something that's very, very important, often women aren't as prepared. So after I emerged a few years after that experience, and just realized that there could be so much more that we could do to empower women to have the language to advocate for themselves, for services to be a lot more proactive rather than reactive the way that it is, and find a way for technology and use technology to democratize this access. And that was kind of the brain that inspired, and the motivation that inspired Parla.
That's really interesting. And I agree. It's something that's very common and women aren't prepared for it. So yes, it does make sense that there should be things in place to support women. So with reference to your business model, how have you measured your success so far, and how have you progressed since the beginning?
It's a combination of things. I think at the very basic level for us, what motivates us to continue is all the feedback that we get from our customers. So we often get some very heartwarming emails and comments from people that they've had such a positive impact by working with us, and that makes us want to improve the product and do more. I think from a business standpoint, we've had investors come on board along the way. So usually we'll have metrics, we'll have a plan that we agree with them, and we kind of manage that on a quarter by quarter basis or year by year basis.
It's very interesting that you spoke about like having investors come on, because that leads me to my next question. With respect to women's health, over the past couple of years, you hear that women founders are expressing difficulty in finding funding, especially from like all male boards or male VCs, because they don't understand the issue and they don't relate to the issue. So a lot of the times they might not be willing to fund. Do you think you've experienced this? And if you have or have not, do you know why you have or have not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tagline of only about, I think it's even less now. It used to be 2%, but now only 1.1% of VC capital goes to women. It goes to show that there's this such a big gap on funding women businesses. And I think, unfortunately, that there's quite a lot of problems that we as female founders run into. I think there's still a lot of capital that's held in funds that haven't quite realized how big of an opportunity women's health is, or that they might still be kind of hesitant to invest in women. I think also there are less women out there trying to raise capital, so it's a little bit of a supply-demand issue, for lack of a better word. So I think there is still a lot that we need to do in terms of educating investors to make bets in more diverse founders, and then also to help women want to build businesses and go out and raise capital.
So, since the beginning of Parla and to where you are now, do you think that there has been a shift in the area of women's
Yeah,
health that you worked in?
I think there's definitely been a lot more awareness. I definitely hear a lot more about it. And I think just even the amount of funds that I've seen pop up in the last 12 to 24 months, focusing specifically on founding female founders or funding female founders and even angel investors doing that. I think it's definitely a positive change. But I think there's still a lot more that we can do. And I think even for like kind of training women to pitch, to kind of have the courage to be bold is all those things are there. I mean, I'm a culprit of it. I constantly have imposter syndrome, and I think it's so common that women do have that, and men sometimes don't have it as much. There's like this one study that men will apply for a job if they qualify for like 60% of the things, but the women feel like they need to qualify for 100% of it. Or women are always saying sorry, like those things, unfortunately, and I do that, is a little bit of kind of that unwinding that we need to do in our minds and in society to start closing that gap. But I do think that things are getting positive, but it's still so big, right? I mean, 2% is nothing. It'll take a lot to get to 50-50. But the awareness is there, and I think having the awareness is the first step.
Yes, I agree. It's always the first step for people to understand that there's an issue and believe that there is an issue, and that way we can work together to solve it.
Exactly.
So, do you have any advice for budding women's entrepreneurs?
So is that if women want to start a business? Is that
Yeah,
the
so
question?
if a woman wanted to start a women's health startup, how would you tell them to go about it?
So I think, well, first, women should start. It doesn't have to be in women's health. I think the best startups are those that you have a real big passion and a real connection to it. So if you love finance, start a fintech company. You know, it's don't feel like just because you're a woman, you need to start a business that's around women's health, childcare, the kind of cliches. Like it doesn't have to be like that. I love when I see women start businesses in kind of very traditional male-dominated areas. I think most importantly, if you're going to start something that you're really passionate about, because starting anything is very difficult. So if you don't have that passion, it's very, very hard. I think find a mentor is really helpful. Somebody who might have either started a business themselves or have funded female founders. They can just kind of really give you that coaching early on of what you need to do. Even the pep talks, like that is extremely, extremely helpful. I find it very helpful for myself, and I advise everybody to be able to have kind of that champion and that coach. And then I think really think about carefully the team that you build around you. I think as a founder and as a female founder, we might feel often that we need to do everything and we need to know everything. But sometimes it's actually understanding what are the areas that you either don't like or you're not that great at, and you can get somebody who's really passionate about those things, and then you create a very strong team. So those are kind of the three things that I think are really important. Build something you're passionate about, find a mentor, and build a team around you.
Oh, thank you. I think that's advice that our listeners would really benefit from. During our research, we also found a couple of articles that were basically profiling you. And I saw that outside of Paula, you also help empower women in their reproductive journeys. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yeah, for me, I see myself, I have multiple responsibilities. I think I have one to kind of lead Parla and grow it, but I think also I'm very passionate about helping women and mentoring them if they're trying to think about having starting a business, or if they're having trouble conceiving or having pregnancy loss. I think often when you go through that journey, you just realize how isolating it can be. And I've made it my life mission to help women who are going through that. So that help doesn't have to be always through Parla, and I'm happy to do that on one-to-one.
Nice. And initially, we were talking about how it's always like awareness is the first step. Do you feel like there's a lot of misconceptions around women's health and in specifically fertility? Do you think that there are misconceptions that could be addressed?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of women's health still is very much shrouded in taboo. I mean, women still feel embarrassed talking about their periods. And and that's something that we deal with every single month. So imagine things that you're not quite prepared to deal with, like pregnancy loss or infertility, or if you have conditions like PCOS or endometriosis. Women find it very hard to express their needs or feel like when they do, they're being heard. And I think that has a lot of issues because it often is because those topics are taboo. And so there is a large misconception in all the issues that we have. And it starts with awareness. I think it starts a lot with knowledge and education. So educating women about all the different aspects about our period, our different reproductive life stages, the good and the risks. It's very important that we have those conversations a lot more proactively. Like in school, you'll just be learning about the contraceptive pill, but we need to talk about fertility. We need to talk about miscarriages. We need to talk about menopause. Like all those topics needs to be part of our daily dialogue. It needs to be part of our narrative a lot more than it is now. I think now those narratives tend to just be present when women are struggling and in kind of very small circles. And that just leads to all sorts of negative outcomes.
And my final question would be that, do you think that your background as a private equity investor has helped in your success and just understanding how to maneuver with terms of like funding and I guess budgeting? Because as a company, you kind of need to have all of that in order.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it helped with some credibility. Investors appreciate my models. So I can communicate through the numbers. So yes, I think so. It has helped me, but is it a must-have? No. There are plenty of way more successful investors way more successful founders than me who have had no private equity background. I think a lot of it is about understanding the user problem, building a company that addresses those user needs, and it's a whole host of skills outside of banking that can help you with that. So it did, but by no means do I think that was like the silver bullet.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm going to pass over to Consuela and she'll continue. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
I want to kind of start off with a question that perhaps is a bit personal. Kind of interested because from my personal level, I always wanted to start a business, but having like an Asian background, even though I was educated in the UK and grew up in the UK, but I'm still not confident in a sense. I don't know where this comes from, but I just don't see loads of Asian or minority founders, especially female founders around me. And I just feel like maybe there just isn't a place for me. I was just kind of reflecting on this literally just now because I was like, why do I think so? I don't understand where this comes from because no one ever told me that I can't do it. And it's not like I don't think I have the ability, but exactly, I don't understand where this kind of diffidence come from. I wonder if you like have ever experienced something similar like this, or do you have any advice for this kind of feelings?
Yeah, well, I definitely met a lot of Asian founders. So I don't think it's I wouldn't take ethnicity as an additional barrier. We have so many barriers to work on already. So hope not to layer that one. I mean, I think I definitely do think that if we kind of start adding the layers of what are women founders from a minority background or who get money, that funnel gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. So I think you're right in that sense that probably coming from a minority background makes it even harder. So I think from a statistics standpoint, you're right, but from a psychological standpoint, from you starting something, I'd like you not to have that as an additional fear factor. So I think you need to dig a little bit. It's such a personal journey. And you would probably dig a little bit as to what's the fear, right? Because I think anything that stops us from doing something typically will be wrapped around some form of fear or expectation that you might have of yourself, or that you think that others might have of you. And I'd probably start by trying to unpack those. And just writing a list. Is it because you feel like you won't make enough money and you need to make a certain amount of money to be comfortable? Is it a fear of not succeeding, not having the right skills? I think once you unpack those, One, it's very liberating because I think you'll very immediately be able to see what's real and what's not real. And for the things that feel very, very real, you can then at least start developing a plan on how to kind of deal with it, right? Like I think one big thing for any founder is money. Am I going to make enough? This is the amount of money that I need to have. Like this is my basic needs, etc. But I think if you at least know, one, you will know how much you need to raise, you know how long you can go with your savings. But I think it's quite empowering to kind of unpack it and break it down. I think then if the fears that you're having is more around skills or people's expectations, etc., I think that is where a coach comes in very well, because that person can almost be kind of your mirror, and they can say, okay, well, why do you think that you can't do X, Y, and Z? Like you've done this kind of training, or at least there are certain areas that you can say, okay, well, I can at least do a course on this, or I can hire somebody in the team to do this. I think it's that process of trying to unpack what is it that is causing you to feel like you can't do it or you're afraid of doing it. And then from there, you'll be surprised at what comes out.
I think that's so helpful, because actually I haven't heard anyone kind of talking about it from this perspective, even though I've been talking to so many different founders as well through like this platform. And if we just kind of move on from this kind of personal level to more like a bigger scale conceptual level, I'm really curious about, do you have any thoughts on the definition for social impact?
I think there are a lot of social issues that are out there. And so there's, I think health is one, I think diversity is another, climate's another. I think as a society, there are things in our collective agenda that is very important to start democratizing or enabling. And I think businesses that are helping those agendas is how I would define it. So, at one extreme, there's the UN agenda. I think there's at the other extreme, there's like so many articles about what are the top things that we need tech companies to help bridge and close the gap. So I define it more like that rather than thinking of as, profits or charities. Like I kind of don't think of it as much like that, but more how much of a good will it do to people's lives and our well-being and the world we're in, and does that, how does that translate? So even I think kind of for women, financial knowledge, that's a positive social impact, right? So it might somewhat fall under fintech, but it's helping you close a gap that is there.
That's really interesting. And I wanted to just follow up on that. Do you think it makes a difference regarding the size of your organization? Do you think it has to be like a very big tech company or like a big multinational company to actually make an effective social impact? Or do you think like small organizations can also make really effective impact?
I think so. I think it, for big societal shifts, you need not just one organization. I think you need multiple organizations working together. But I think you can be small and have a lot of impact because you can shift conversations, you can shift perceptions, you can start a dialogue, and then it becomes a bigger thing. So yeah, I don't think it doesn't necessarily have to lie on a multinational to have an impact. You can be a small company and really disrupt a certain industry. You eventually become big, but you don't have to start there.
Exactly, I love that. And do you think there's still like misconceptions around social impact, especially the social impact you guys are making as an organization?
Is there a misconception? I mean, I think that's a good question. I think there could be, I don't know if it's a misconception, but I think there could be a lot of whitewashing. I think there can be organizations saying that they're doing good when they really aren't, or like how do you measure it? And how do you make people accountable for it? Climate is such a big topic, and there's everybody going, this is, carbon negative, carbon zero, all that stuff, but is it? So I think that's where we need to be a little bit careful, is how much of what we are fed is real versus whitewashing.
I also agree that's super important. That kind of leads on to like, do you think that social impact can be measured? Because I know some people have said they just don't think it can be measured because there's so many different definitions for it, right? But do you think it should be measured?
Yeah, I think it should. I think for each of the things that you're doing, you should try to measure it, because then how do you improve? So, you know, for us is how many women's lives do we touch? How many, I know how, like we usually ask them in surveys if they do feel better or not. So I think there are ways of quantifying that. And for us to really be able to affect change, we should be able to strive to measure it.
That's really interesting. But do you think, because, for example, like a different social enterprise might have a different agenda, right? Even though if they're still working under kind of the female health section, but they have a different measurement, then you can't really compare. Do you think that's a problem?
I think each organization can decide how to measure it. It's a bit about how, I don't think it needs to be standardized. I don't think impact needs to be fully standardized to say, and I talk about health. I'm not going to go try to venture into climate and all that other stuff. I'm sure they have other things to measure, but I think in health you can measure it in different ways, because also there are different markers, right? So somebody might be trying to see impact on mental health, and that might be very different from even just measuring people who are trying to get access to a physician. Those are all positive things, but it doesn't have to be the same metric. I think the overall principle should be you started in one place and you should be able to improve over time. But does it have to be the exact same thing? No.
Do you think there are like small ways to make social impact without starting a whole new company or like an organization?
We can make a social impact in our daily lives. Every single person can, and we have to have that as our common consciousness. It is not somebody else's problem. We all can take a small step, and together we can make a big difference.
Do you think, like, because when I kind of talk to my friends, they'll be like, yeah, we do want to make a social impact, but we don't know what small ways that we can make a social. Do you have any like ideas?
In your language, the way you talk to people, the way you treat people, we all have a responsibility, and it starts with that awareness. Just being conscious how you talk to a woman or to somebody from a minority background. That's all taking steps in the right direction. You don't have to do something big to make it feel like that's the only way that makes a difference. Like even daily habits. Like I think now, my husband is a big environmental, and he works in climate, but we do our part at home with what we eat, with what we, the things that we buy. It's that collective power. I mean, if you think about COVID, right? COVID completely changed the way we've behaved in the last 2 years, but we couldn't have done it if not every single person took that responsibility upon them. And we should treat that in all these social issues that we have. It starts with the individual. And we need to stop kind of that sense of, oh, it's somebody else's responsibility, it's not mine. It starts with you. And that is what actually can drive the change, is when we can do those incremental things, but together is really powerful.
I love that message. I just kind of want to end our podcast recording on what ways we can support you and your organization.
Well, come sign up, learn about the product, and if you think that there's anybody who could benefit from the support that we give, share it, because what we want is to help as many lives as we can.
That's amazing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lina. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lina.
No, my pleasure.
You can find us on Anchor and Spotify, and if you like our discussions, please follow and share. Don't forget to follow Effective Change on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter for exclusive updates, inspiration, and memes.